won't close until October. So what we have in the FY22 is a pretty significant debt service surplus because of the transfer that we made, but the payment remains the same. So the levy was not adjusted. Our payments for debt service on the bonds remain the same with the refunding, but what we're able to do is shift some of that from interest, if you'll remember, to principal, which is part of the savings. And so what you'll see there is a full $25,776,000 in expenditures for debt service. That's why the all funds is where it is, but that was planned and that's part of the refunding.
So in that 25 million is the
we have to,
point, whatever.
yes, sir. Yeah. So that's all fine. I'm not worried about that. One of the things that I'm going to continue taking a look at is if you look at our operating funds, we've got a 3% surplus. That's good news, and we're going to be fine. But one of the things where it stands right now, obviously I have 2 different levies across a fiscal year, and what you can see is a pretty significant surplus in the ed fund, and then very small outspendings in like Fund 80 and Fund 50. I'll be doing some work to maybe adjust this December's levy between now and December, just to make sure that each fund has a surplus. But that's work I'll do between now and the final budget that you'll see. Skip a couple slides. There's kind of a gray or beige colored slide saying preliminary budget details. This just breaks it down. I'm happy to take any more granular questions. I'm not going to go cell by cell in this. I do want to state, obviously, that our local revenue by far is our big driver. And one of the things that I did want to mention, since no one spoke or had any comment during the FY22 amended budget hearing, this amended budget for FY22 and this preliminary budget for 23 both could be impacted by local property taxes pretty significantly. We get our money in Will County, and so I'm not worried about that, but I talked with Dr. Tingley earlier today. There are 2 tax distributions in June. Based on our cash flow, and you can look, I think it's the second to last page in the cash flow report, in the treasurer's report, it had today was the first June distribution, and June 30th is the second. And the split on that was somewhere like 23 million and 15 million. And I called the treasurer's office because today, instead of getting 23, we got 40, which is great. We know we're going to get the money. But my reflection on that is is it just that lopsided? So I went back 2 years ago, since Will County did the 4 payments, and even 2 years ago, it was like a 65-35 split or a 60-40 split. So either we're going to get very, very little here on June 30th, or this really tight surplus for FY22 that I just put together for the amended budget is not going to be true. We're going to get more revenue now, have a much bigger surplus in FY22, which is fine, but then that's revenue we won't get in FY23. So I just want you all to be aware that was a surprise to me today. Not bad news, but it impacts what fiscal year this stuff falls in, and then how the fund balance reports and where the revenue goes for this preliminary budget.
What's your view on accrual versus cash?
What's my view?
Yeah. We talked about this with Brad. For stuff like this,
Yeah, for items like this specifically, the accrual is a nice concept. However, there's cons with it. I know outside of education, a pure cash basis isn't as common. I think to make a change like that, what I will say is to make a change like that is a real shift in philosophy. I've worked in accrual, I've worked in modified accrual, and I've worked in cash. None of them bother me. When you come to things like this, the accrual piece is nice, because then I'm not coming to you all in the FY23 preliminary budget, because this is something I think about is I know you all want to pre-fund capital projects, right? So what's in this document I'm going through right now is a 3% operating surplus and $3 million for next summer's capital projects. It would be great to have a bigger surplus here in FY22. But what I want to make sure we still keep in mind then is, okay, we got that money early, but if that's not going to hit on a cash basis, Chris, to your point, if that's not going to hit the FY23 books as revenue, how does that impact what we are able, in a literal cash budgeting sense, to pre-fund for capital improvements? And I'm sure we'd have discussions, and you all might talk about, obviously we'll have better fund balances now. Do we roll some of that into 60 early or something like that? It's all fine, but
Is that what you're saying is philosophical about the change?
what do you mean? I'm
Well,
sorry.
earlier you said it's a philosophical, there's a philosophical difference.
Yeah,
You have to come, is that what you're referring to?
yeah, it's because for me, the money's the money. And luckily, Will County's got a great collection. Whether we get it now or we get it in July doesn't really bother me, but and obviously, as a board, you're very, very well informed, given everything you've lived through. But it's, from a budgetary standpoint, I would just seek your counsel in terms of, okay, we have a much better surplus now in FY22. What are we going to do with that when we didn't expect it? And next year, we can't budget as much in capital projects, or do we need to reallocate that money, make a transfer early? So the cash part, in this sense, complicates it. I'm okay with it as long as we have the discussion. So that's the philosophical part. Is I've worked in all of them, none of them bother me, as long as the board and Dr. Tingley and I are on the same page in terms of how that works from an accounting standpoint. I hope I'm answering your question okay.
No, that's answering it. I mean, I'm just, like, I'm just like, from an oversight standpoint, I mean, again, I'm in the corporate world,
Yeah,
so of
right.
course you want accrual.
Yep.
Because, I mean, let's be honest, I think part of how this district got into trouble was the being on a strictly cash basis, and, bills, it appeared to me, were kind of moved around between years, et cetera. So, I mean, from a purely oversight basis and as a board member, I would always go towards accrual. But I know, obviously, you also have to think of, a finance department and a school and the burden that it puts on them,
Yep.
et cetera. So I was just curious of what your viewpoints are.
The pros to the cash are while it's not as clean in some ways, it's cleaner in others. And just because of how we're constrained, I mean, also compared to the corporate world, in how many areas are we doing the first presentation of a budget in June for a year that begins July 1st? In the corporate world, that's probably in March. But the way that our revenues and expenses cycle through, that's never a reality in education. That's why we do it September, a quarter of the way through the fiscal year. So it certainly is different. I don't necessarily recommend changing because I think it's a pretty big overhaul, but I think that this conversation here and you all knowing how that might fluctuate between in June and July, and what do we do with that surplus, how does that transfer to capital projects next year, would be my answer to that, as long as we're on the same page. The only other thing I was going to say on that slide is under the capital projects column on the far right, you see $4 million in expenses. That is the 3.5 that had been pre-funded plus the extra $500,000 that you all did not transfer for the debt service abatement because we already had enough interest and fund balance there, and we reallocated that to capital projects. So thank you for that. Moving on to the 3-year historical budget comparison. Just one final reminder, I've said this before, this is the black slide with white text is where I am. Our revenue, local revenue, is projected to be down in FY23. And again, that is as Mr. Kaufman wrapped up fiscal year 21 and we began fiscal year 22, there were about $5 million of uncollected property tax revenues at that point, just because of the 4 distributions that happened in that year that we then accounted for in this year, which was why you see a jump from 77 million to 94. And so that's not anything bad, it's just we're returning to a normal distribution cycle. You see salaries are up, employee benefits are down. I hope we never have a year in terms of medical insurance claims like we did this year, and I don't think that will be repeated based on the analysis we're doing. Next slide, are there any cautions at this time? I think obviously you know them. It is supply chain, high inflation, and the continued medical claims. Next slide, what changes might occur in the coming months? I talked about maybe shifting this December's tax levy around, shifting monies from one fund to another to make sure we've got surpluses in each fund. Transportation costs, I mentioned CPPRT. I don't think it'll be that high again, and I don't want to assume that it will be. Next slide is just a reminder that there's no action that we're asking of you tonight. This is just first blush of this budget. And what I'll do is come back at the August, I think it's August 11th is our August meeting. And we'll have much more refined salary and benefits numbers at that time, as I think Rob and Steve, we're still doing some hiring today, and I think still had some things going on. So that'll be refined by August. Happy to take any questions or comments that you might have.
So my first.
No,
go ahead.
you go, please.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Just back to your, the 3-year comparison slide. I was just curious, why are we anticipating professional services costs to go down? You know, you have that expense at 3% less. It went up $1.5 million from 21 to 22, and now you think it's gonna drop back down?
Some of that is just the specific, so in professional services, in that category might be repairs. It might be utility services and different things like that. Some of those are up, others are down, and just the anticipated needs at this time,
Gotcha.
they're not as high, truly. Whether that's software costs, anything like that, that's a purchase service.
That's all part.
So,
Okay.
so what you're seeing here, Joe, is the aggregate. If you would like, I'm happy to provide the board with more detail, though.
But also, you're looking at actual versus budgeted. So the 21 is actual, where the 22 is budget. It's not necessarily actual. So
Gotcha,
Mike's
'cause we're
Mike's looking at actual to date to help formulate the next year's budget as well.
I am. Thanks, Scott.
And we're not completely closed yet.
Sure. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to cut you off.
So my first, I guess, would just be a comment on just the overall budgeting. I think when you're talking about the state and whatever that is, CPBRT, or
Yep.
I would be more comfortable if we are on the as conservative as possible side, because I think two things are working against the state, and we never really got into a great budget position, but there's going to be no federal COVID money coming into the states, which is basically how they propped up the schools with that money. And capital gains, they had a windfall this year on their tax revenue, which is not going to repeat itself in next year. So I don't know if I'm saying to be conservative, maybe a year early, but I would be very conservative because I don't think the state's going to be able to come up with the money, whether it's this year or next year, to kind of start increasing things. So I would be more comfortable if we remained on the conservative side there.
Understood.
And then can you explain to me, because I think this goes into, well, at least a vote we're going to have later, the stop loss on the insurance and the medical insurance being on a calendar year basis, and we're doing this on a fiscal year basis, and where that might, if we're going to hit it, and if that impacts one of these budget years.
Sure. So it's calendar year and it impacts FY23 is the succinct answer. And the elaboration is, right now the claims are so high, the amended budget only has that 1.3, I think is where I ended, and that does not include, by the way, not to run on a tangent, but that does not include any sale of land scheduled with a closure for June 20th, by the way. Yep. So there's that does not include the 1.5 in land or the property tax revenue. But to your point, the contra liability that's sitting out there where the claims bills we've had to pay are exceeding what we're funding off the general ledger, that's going to hit this year, and there's nothing we can do about it. But on a calendar year basis, if we were to hit the aggregate stop loss, we would know that, and that would be for calendar year 22, but in fiscal year 23. Now, I don't know how.
Sorry.
Nope, you go.
So that's in this number here.
Yeah, so what I did was the general ledger expenses, in a perfect world, if claims meet deductions, and was $6.4 million this year. That was nowhere near enough. I don't want to take it up to 9 or 10 million because I don't think that's appropriate either. We'd either hit the stop loss and or we'd see claims as we are start to come down. So I've taken it up an extra $700,000. I've oscillated between 600 and 900 on that. I think it's safe right now. I may, as we close the fiscal year and do some analysis with STUM and we start to prep for calendar year 23 premiums, I may feel differently and come with an update to you guys to say it needs to go up a couple $100,000. But to your point, it's not gonna be, what it is this year, because we'll hit that in December.
So I think that's obviously, at least from an oversight standpoint, from my view, like what we have to watch the most. So I think, like, seeing some scenario analysis on that when we come up to the budget. So when, you know, because you're kind of going to know by that point, right, what we're going to have to pay through December 31st. So for the first 6 months, you're going to know by the time you do your budget. Because it's either going to hit the stop loss. Is that correct?
We should have a good idea.
Yeah.
We may not know, because by the time you all approve it, I'm
Well, you truly
certainly
have to
happy to
kinda-
make some changes between August and September, but I'd like to keep, when you put a tentative budget on public display, I think the spirit of that is you make as minimal a changes as possible between then and September. But if we have to, that's no problem, as long as you're all good with it. But yeah, we would know 9 months. We would know 9 months of it and maybe a prediction on October. So at that point, we should have a good idea if we're gonna hit it or not. For all I know, we'd be trending so high we hit it sooner, in October. I don't know if it'd be that egregious or not. but-
I'm trying to make sure I'm thinking this right, but you'll know when we're doing that in August what the maximum we would have to pay out.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I
So
will.
that's what I'm saying. So you're really trying to.
Oh, what the ceiling would be?
Yeah,
Sure.
what the ceiling, so you're
Yep.
gonna know the ceiling.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're gonna know, that's what I'm saying, you're gonna know 6 months, you're gonna know the max amount to put into the budget for
Yes.
6 months.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
So then you're
for the
just,
6 months, then I'm ballparking the future
you're
6.
ballparking yeah. So
Yep.
that's what I was trying to get, okay.
Yep. Good input, thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Dubach? If not, I would like to move on to the action items, which include the presentation of invoices for May 20th, consent agenda, rather. Approval of the regular meeting minutes of May 19th, 2022, and the closed meeting minutes of May 19th, 2022. Approval of the payrolls of May 20th and June 3rd of 2022. Personnel reports, designation of depositories, appointment of the district treasurer for 2023, designate Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, CSBO, to prepare the fiscal year 2023 tentative budget, and the joint agreement with District 843 for operations and maintenance. Would anyone like anything pulled from the consent agenda for discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented. A motion? A motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Sorry, Mike, nobody wanted to jump in and be the district treasurer this year, so I guess you're stuck with it again.
It's all good.
All right, moving on to the action items. Presentation of invoices for May 20th, 22 through June 16th, 2022.
Motion to approve the invoices in the amount of $3,100,741.83 dated June 16th, 2022.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? Any discussion? If not, Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the presentation of the fiscal year 2023 invoices.
Motion to approve the invoices in the amount of $919,297.14 dated July 22nd, 2022.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second and a third. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the treasurer's report for May of 2022.
I want to go through this briefly, as I think between the other presentations, I've touched on some of this. Receipts in May were 10.3 million, expenses were 7.8, and the cash balance at the end of the month was 18.1. In terms of the year-to-date, this is now in with the amended budget as its consideration, and so 70.4% of the revenues and 87.9% of expenses year-to-date have been realized, and that's in comparison to 65 and 88.4 a year ago. Our claims remain high. This is what I was starting to talk about before. A few months ago, it was 1.3 million. Then it was 930 some odd thousand. Then it was 902. Now it's 802. So they're going in the right direction. Investment report. I gave a more detailed update last month. We've got a plan with PMA and set up an ICS. We've got some laddering in, and I think that's going to spell good things for next fiscal year. In terms of a cash flow report, we had a negative cash variance of $265,000. The May tax distributions were about 1% lower than the historical trend, but then as I mentioned earlier, now we just got $40 million today. So I think that number 5 in this treasurer's report, the looking ahead, I had said estimated cash balance, and that should say end of June, is anticipated to be 51.2 million based on historical cash flow trends. But again, that's subject to how the June 30th distribution comes in. I'm happy to take any questions on this if you have them.
What's happening with the land sale?
Closing June 20th.
We have the wire transfer set up. We will sign the deeds this evening, and it is anticipated to close June 20th at this time. But everything is set and ready to go for Tinley to push the button. Our attorneys have crossed all the Ts, dotted the Is. We'll have the signature to transfer the deed this evening, and we should be good to go to collect that money on June 20th. That's not for us. There's been different discussions. All I know is we're right there at the finish line. I'm not holding my breath because we've been here before. However, we've never gotten to this point where we've prepared everything. The attorneys have worked together. We have to have the deed signed this evening, and we're supposed to receive the wire transfer on June 20th.
And for the same caution that's in Dr. Tingley's voice, that's not included in this treasurer's report either.
I like that attitude. If there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to approve the treasurer's report for May 2022 as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. There's nothing further. Lynn, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the student activities report for May of 2022.
Student activities report is included in your backup materials. The fund balance of $2,136,496, revenues of $447,824, and expenditures of $429,360. The only account that was in the negative is the Palms at East at $387. It's expected to be positive again by June 30th. The anticipation is that all of our funds are positive at June 30th as they're conducting camps and different fundraisers at this time. That concludes the report.
Thank you. Any questions regarding the student activities? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the student activities report for May of 2022 as presented. Thank you. I have a motion and a second from Mr. Lacine. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open.
Sorry, I just don't have as many of you to look at for motions tonight.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the adoption of the fiscal year 2022 amended budget.
As mentioned earlier, a more substantial update was given in April on this. You all know what's happened. In April, I had predicted a 1.4% operating surplus. Right now, we've received a little bit more revenue, but we've also seen a little bit higher expenses in terms of, mostly in the buildings and grounds world, a little bit in transportation with fuel costs. And so ending operating surplus is set at 1.3%. But that does not include the two things mentioned, the sale of the land or the fact that we may or may not get more property tax revenue here prior to June 30th, or on June 30th, I should say. So there's really nothing else. I'm happy to answer questions, but this has been on display. Very, very minor changes made, and we've talked about them here tonight, and just need this for accounting purposes with the state.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike regarding the amended budget? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022 amended budget as presented.
Just to make sure, there's been no changes since the last board meeting, correct? No changes since the last board meeting?
To the amended budget?
Yeah.
Only in terms of like the CPPRT revenue coming in high. So that changed. That's why it's gone from 1.4 to 1.3. We revised since the medical claims came down a little bit. And that's in the summary in the memo in terms of by type. You can see benefits. The benefits are higher than the original budget, of course, but they've been toned down. And then in terms of site, buildings and grounds expenses. But the offset with the CPPRT revenue, very, very minimal changes, and a 1.4 to a 1.3.
Now, if there are not any more questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022 amended budget as presented. I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the auditor contract for fiscal year 22 through 24.
We would recommend that we renew and go a 3-year engagement with Wormer, Rogers, Duran, and Ruzon. We've used them since the turnaround. Chris met with them several times as we went through our initial year of auditing. Things have gotten quite a bit better since utilizing their services and taking their constructive criticisms. Katie Napier has just been our signing auditor partner for 1 fiscal year. She's worked as a field rep, but this is the first time where she's been the partner assigned to us. We feel that they've been very effective in helping us manage our financial turnaround, and the board would recommend that we go 3 more years with those services. Annual increases, as you can see, is a 3% annual increase in the bottom of the letter. Mike, if you have anything to add, or if there are any questions, I know we've worked very closely with them over the last 6 years to improve.
So you put some good quotes on changing audit firms. I mean, I don't think there should be a mandatory switching, but I do think after this next contract, you should look at it, but I'll be long gone. So the important one to me, though, is I know Katie, but she's been on it pretty much since the beginning.
She has, just not as the partner.
I would make sure that there's a plan to keep rotating partners if we're going to stay at the same audit firm.
And
because
agreed.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and the underlying staff, like it should be staffed so that the next person who's going to be the audit partner, whatever you call them, the signing audit partner, is on there. So just making sure we have a senior person and that it's rotating.
And I think that is what they have done with Katie as well. Sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation, Chris. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to approve the auditor contract for fiscal year 22 through 24 as presented. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to workers' compensation renewal for fiscal year 2023.
So, Mike,
This is a recommendation for a one-year renewal. It's an 18-month that's expiring, but, you know, we took a look at some other quotes and prices. I think the board also did this, and Brad and Scott did this a year or two ago. You know, certain things we've moved to click for other coverages. They certainly offer this, but they are more expensive and also require a 3-year commitment, which is something I don't really want to get into right now. And ICRMT has done a nice job. They've got a 0.29% increase for next year, so I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Smallest inflationary number I've seen in a long time.
With everything else as high as it is, I say let's do this.
Are there any questions regarding the workers' compensation renewal? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the workers' compensation renewal contract for fiscal year 2023 as presented.
So moved.
I have a first and a second. Linda, if you would open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the second reading for policies.
the only recommendation I would make of not accepting the press updates would be on 2-230, public participation at school board meetings and petitions to the board. As you read through, if you read all the footnotes, the recommended change comes as a result of a school board having 30 minutes of public comment similar to ours. The school board did not like the topic the public was speaking on, so they stopped public comment after 15 minutes and said, that's it, we're done, we're moving on, go to the next agenda item. Well, we've never done that. This board, if anything, has gone past the 30 minutes if more people have been signed up. So it'd be my recommendation that we keep our verbiage, that we have a minimum of 30 minutes. We offer at least 30 minutes. If in the case more people elect to vote, the board can always extend that time. But this change was a direct result of a district violating OMA by saying, no, we don't want to hear you, we're stopping in 15 minutes. As I said, this board has never done that. I don't think that's ever been a concern or a problem. So my recommendation would be to accept the changes as presented, but continue to explicitly state we will have at least 30 minutes of offer at least 30 minutes of public comment.
And that's within our legal.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. The thing you can't do, Chris, is state that you're going to have a certain amount and then not provide that amount.
And then what is the process if, like, is it a board vote to extend it, or?
It should be. We have not done that in the past, but in the future, if there are more individuals that want to speak, you can have a motion and a board majority would allow for more time. And the board can set that time. We motion to allow an additional 30 minutes of public comment this evening, and a majority vote then would allow that. In the past, we've just allowed that, which would not be a violation of OMA. It's just if you do read the procedures underneath, it does state that it would be a majority vote.
So a board member would just have to make a motion, and then it could be second, or not seconded, and then you'd have a vote.
Then you have a vote, yes.
So you can extend, okay.
Yes, you can always extend it. A majority of the board can extend public comment beyond the 30 minutes. Correct. And then everything else, I'd recommend that we accept the changes as presented.
So Chris, do you wish you would have known that for your early days on the board for some of those meetings, so you could have
Well,
extended?
they've changed OMA quite a bit since then.
You could have voted to
Probably
extend
because of
public
us.
comment
Yeah.
No comment.
back in 2016. Are there any further questions or discussion regarding the policies? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the policies as recommended by Dr. Tingley and keep it as it has been. I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to informational items. Anything from 8:43 from the May 24th meeting?
Nothing additional to report.
FOIA requests.
There are none for this month.
How about that? Building and grounds.
Building and Grounds, thank you to Mike and Kelly for getting this together for this particular meeting.
Community relations.
Just kind of a wrap-up on the school year, some good news in there to share. It's been a good spring.
Excellent. Asset of the month.
Asset of the month for July is creative activities. Kids spend 3 or more hours each week in lessons or practice in music, theaters, or other arts. Encourage your kids to get involved with the arts as much as possible and let them choose what to do at school. Provide access to instruments and art materials in the community. Sponsor youth bands, orchestras, drama clubs, dance troupes, and singing groups. Provide places to practice. We have a big concert here. Our orchestra rock concert is at Central in the auditorium tomorrow night.
Is that tonight?
Tomorrow night.
Oh, it is tomorrow.
Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock, Steve, or 6? Rehearsals tonight,
Oh,
the actual
okay.
concert. So if you want to catch a
sorry.
freebie, you can sneak in the back, yeah. The performance is tomorrow night.
Saw them all over there. Legislative report.
Nothing to report at this time.
The superintendent's district report.
Well, we talked last month about our summer remediation program, transition program, whatever you want to call it there in the short intersession. We had 58 students successfully completed our short program there to enable them to change their failing grade to a P for pass in both Algebra 1 and English, which allows them to move on to the sophomore level. And that's particularly important because with the math students, they wouldn't be able to move forward. So now they're under the gun to get those 3 years of credit done. The English students, many times we double those students up. I never understood why that made sense. You have kids that don't want to read and write, and then we double them up. So we were able to, 58 of the students made it through. We just had a very few not make it through the program. So that's successful. That's something we're going to evaluate those students' performance this year as sophomores, and certainly something we're going to look to do again next year. We've had 75 teachers participated in our professional development this June, and we have completed over 240 hours of departmental collaboration to evaluate, review, and revise our curriculum and instruction. So it has been a busy first half of June, but I want to thank the teachers who stepped up with this remediation program, really did a nice job. We were able to get in and watch some of the progress taking place. Several of the students wrote notes back saying, this really helps me feel like I have a chance now. And so congratulations to those teachers and those department chairs that put that plan into effect.
Excellent news. Any other district business?
None at this time.
COVID mitigation.
No updates.
That's wonderful to hear as well. Any correspondence?
None at this time.
That concludes the informational items, and with that, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of employees, collective negotiating and to establish the sale or lease price of real estate. A motion, I have a second. Everyone signify by saying aye. The vote is unanimous and the ayes have it. And we don't have, do we have anything?
We will have.
That's right, we will have an item or two after closed session this evening.
They're in the executive content, so on each one, when you click on it, so like one, you skip.
So number one, we don't have to do
No,
anything.
no, and then if you click-
Number one, number two.
Not yet, we'll have to do that before we start any action. We'll just need to move to go to open session.
We did that.
Or did we just leave closed?
Oh, motion to leave
You're fine.
closed and go back into open.
You're fine. Oh, we got it? Okay, we're good. You're fine. You're fine. We're done talking about you. You're good.
Salaries for fiscal year 2023 as presented and discussed in closed session. I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to administrative restructuring. I need a motion to approve the administrative restructuring and compensation for the 2022-23 school year as presented and discussed in open session. I'm sorry, closed session. I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. And finally, I need a motion that Dr. Tingley has met all performance goals and approve an employment agreement with Dr. Tingley for the period of 2022 through 2027 as discussed and presented in closed session. I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Linda, if you'd open the vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you, and congratulations, Dr. Tingley. And if there is no other business, you were sweating there for a second. If there's no other business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Everyone signify by saying aye. The ayes have it, it's unanimous.
There's some stuff for everybody to sign, just so you know.
Okay.